Hey folks, welcome back to the Catholic Coaching Podcast. We're talking influence today, continuing on with our Becoming a Embodied Catholic Leader series. Influencing, this has been a whole lot of fun. It builds on the ownership podcast series that we just went through. Erin, what do we got for people?
Oh, it's going to be really exciting. I kind of want to just leave the mystique of it all. But we are going to be talking about influence and the distinction between influence and manipulation.
That's a big one. Guys, a lot of the time we think we're influencing, we're actually manipulating. Man, we don't let that be you. Okay, so we're going to make some really clear lines of distinction between what influencing is, what manipulation is, and how you can move from manipulation into influencing, so it could really be something that enhances a relationship and enhances the trust and rapport on your team and moves the mission forward. So stay tuned.
Stick around. Hi, guys.
Hey there, influencers. About to be influencers.
Back. Matt, your hat used to be red. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see how his used to be red hat now matches my light pink shirt.
My used to be red hat.
Yes.
Felt like a hat today. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And by the way,
grungy.
Yeah, if you aren't watching us on YouTube, go check it out on YouTube and click the subscribe button, right?
Yeah.
Ring the bell. Is that a thing? I don't know.
Ring my YouTube bell.
Yeah.
All right.
We're still talking about leadership,
and
guys.
I promise not to sing anymore.
I don't know. Your singing voice is pretty good.
No,
so.
I was totally crossing my fingers when I said that. You will hear me sing again.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Hey, we're talking influence. So we're continuing on with our podcast series, Becoming an Embodied Catholic Leader. Okay. We talked a couple of weeks back. Gosh, it might have been months back that we actually opened up this series.
Yeah, it takes like a month to get through each one of these.
Yeah.
A little bit more.
We're really looking at this through the lens of unique design. Our beef with leadership programs was they would hold all of these principles up, and then they wouldn't consider the person's unique design, like who they were, who they are, what their temperament is, what their likes are, their dislikes, their motivation styles, their talents. They wouldn't really consider how they would uniquely embody those principles, be it courage or justice or integrity, something like that. So like the stuff that we bring to the table is who we are, our unique design. And so living out these principles, which quite frankly, they're intangibles, they're ideals, right?
Yep.
But how we make those intangibles visible is always going to be in and through our body. It's always going to be in and through our unique design. So it's going to look a little different because we're all different.
Well, actually, you know what? I think each of the principles are actions. So they are not intangible. They are things that we can actually live out, right? Discern was the first one.
Well,
second one.
Yes. So we're getting into our principles, but I guess let's think like integrity.
I got it.
Integrity is kind of
like virtue and stuff. Okay.
So that's like more of our operating principles that we've been exploring. And so, but we always want to consider unique design, because unique design is the stuff that you bring to the table, the hardwired stuff that God has hardwired where he created you to fulfill a purpose, right? When we reflect on design, we can see purpose in the design. The same way that we can look at a Ford F-150, the purpose is to haul a load. We look at Ferrari and say the purpose is to look good and drive fast and pick up lots of ladies. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Unless you're a lady.
That's the thing. If you like that.
Okay. If
you're a lady, you're probably going to pick up lots of shoes. And you own a Lamborghini.
Okay. Cool.
Shoes. Anyway, okay, so...
Tell me how to influence, Erin.
If we go, so we're talking about influence today. I'm very excited about this one, but we needed to lay the groundwork. So let's go through the past principles that we've already covered. Mm-hmm. So we have covered discernment, right?
Yeah,
like
envision is like the first thing.
Envision, discern, like you got to learn how to discern, right? And so we went through all of the different temperaments and how they discern and how they struggle with discernment and so on and so forth. Okay.
And the premise behind that is you need to be the first to take the vision as a leader. You take the vision that God has given to you, and that's the one that you're inviting people to partner with you on making visible to the world, to like accomplishing that vision. Otherwise, if you don't contemplate that with God, if you don't discern that with God, you end up presenting a vision to them that's your vision, and let's face it, like our vision is never as good as God's.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's boring.
Yeah.
The second principle is ownership. And there's a couple things that you need to own. You need to own what is inside your own mind, right? Like that custody of mind, those thoughts, those emotions that are influenced by your thoughts and then your actions. So like to own those things, and also to own your unique design. Right. And we talked a lot about locus of control. So if you want to hear about that, you can go back and listen to those podcasts. But here we are. We needed to set that up in order to move into influence. I remember listening to Tony Robbins. If you're a Tony Robbins fan, please go out and applaud in the comment section. I love Tony Robbins. I really do. And I think some people love him or hate him. I don't really know the people who hate him. Probably have never heard of him. But he talked about how somebody asked, okay, leadership, what is leadership? The very first thing out of his mouth is influence. He's like, leadership is influence. And it kind of sent me on a research project of what is influence and what is not influence, and what do other people get confused with influence? Because a lot of what we do is we train coaches and teach coaches, and we train them in how to even speak to people and tell people what coaching is and articulate how they can help them. And so influence is a part of it, but there is this thought behind it, like, am I manipulating people?
Yes. Because there's two ways that, like, when you think of like two people with their own, like we go back to our previous podcast on ownership, right? Somebody's got their own thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions. You've got your own thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions. And we need to first acknowledge that each one has their separate things, right? And that's ours to own, right? And the reality is we live in relationship with one another. And I have the ability to influence the way that Erin perceives a situation, right? Or I also have the ability to manipulate the way that Erin sees a situation. There's a subtle difference, and oftentimes people get them confused.
Yes.
We want to get rid of the confusion in this podcast here and draw some clear lines of distinction between when you're showing up as an influencer. That's good, even though you may have some negative connotations about influencers. All right, we're going to redeem that word here today on this podcast. But then also manipulation, which I don't think anybody's happy to be manipulating. Anything.
Yeah, and then beyond that point, when we make those distinctions, we're going to be talking about each of the temperaments and maybe their tendencies towards this, what we call the zone of manipulation, which is where you're kind of like, you're not doing it intentionally. I don't think one person out there, unless they're like this crazy mastermind, like
Dr. Evil.
Yes, like, okay, I'm sure there are people who try to manipulate. I'm sure they exist. But I think most people who are probably listening to this podcast, like, don't mean to be in these places. But what we want to break down are the ways it shows up subtly, and maybe you've overlooked these ways. And so we're going to be talking about that and how each of the temperaments kind of have their tendency towards this manipulation. And then we're going to say how to actually influence beyond this point. And then after this podcast, we're going to be talking about each one of the temperaments in this capacity, how to move from that zone of manipulation to that zone of influence if you find yourself guilty, which we all kind of are a little bit. Like, I mean, I laughed as I was writing these out. I'm like, oh, I totally do that. I do that. Lord, mea culpa. Okay, so
all right, steps today. So first, we're going to define influence and manipulation.
Distinctions.
Make some distinctions. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to identify the common how the temperaments have some common manipulation tendencies. We're just going to lay the groundwork there, but we're going to go much deeper and follow on episodes. Next thing is we're going to talk about common pretty manipulations, right? That people think is actually influence, but it's actually manipulation. So you can be a little self-diagnostic there. And then ultimately how to move into that zone of influence out of manipulation.
Yeah, and we'll get into the details on each one of each one of the temperaments.
We always go deeper.
Yeah.
Always go deeper.
So we're doing an overall view of this. Okay. Matt, what is the distinction between influence and manipulation?
Okay. So I love, Erin is the word nerd. So Erin's like, well, according to Webster's dictionary, influence.
No, it's never Webster's. Okay. It's always the etymology. I go to the root
this is a Latin word nerd. Okay. But I love how, let's just go there. I think that's a great place to start. So if you look at the word influence, it's the Latin root means to flow into, inflow, influence, right?
Yep.
And so you think influere, right? And so you think about the person who's doing the influencing, something's flowing out of them, and the person that's being influenced, like the person that's being influenced needs to be open to receive it. Like I think the image that comes to mind is a pitcher full of water that is being poured into a glass, right?
An empty glass.
An empty open glass.
Yes.
Okay. Now, no problem there. As long as the person is able to receive that, they're open to receiving it, they're open to being influenced, there's no violation of dignity that's taking place there. Now, if there's a lid on the glass, the person is closed, you can't influence. You can't flow into because the person's not open to it. And so oftentimes this is where we get frustrated trying to influence other people when they're not open to receiving what we have to give. And our response goes to move into manipulation. Now, manipulation, like where you actually look up the definition of that. Tell us about the definition of that, Erin.
Manipulation. It actually means to handle skillfully by the hand. It's to handle objects. Actually, that's part of the etymology. It's like this handling of objects. And I remember having this breakthrough moment when I was looking at this. I was like, okay, so like the distinctions, I always look at pictures in my mind. I love the pitcher, right? Where you're pouring the water into an open glass. But then I'm like thinking of like, you know, a potter and clay or something like this, manipulation of objects. And I'm thinking to myself, when we come in relation to others, we do manipulate objects. We don't manipulate people.
Right.
Yes. Because objects do not have their own free will. They are not created for an end necessarily that is beyond this world.
Right. The clay that's being manipulated by the potter is not having its dignity violated by the potter manipulating the clay.
Right. But we don't do that to people. And I think that picture is actually really powerful in really understanding the distinctions. I still go back to those visuals. Like, am I influenced? Am I pouring into? The other thing about pouring into, it implies self-gift. It implies this self-awareness, self-possession, and self-gift.
Yes.
Which those things need to happen first.
And even if we draw on like theology of the body, like all you TOB fans out there, like, give some love, clap your hands, be like, oh, I love TOB. Thanks for weaving this in. Like Joh Paul II talks about the spousal analogy, right? Where he reflects on the marital embrace, right? And he can see that there is a giver and a recipient, right? The person gives freely, the other receives freely, and there's something fruitful that comes forth from it. In the same way, influencing, I'm pouring into the person I'm seeking to influence. I'm giving them something, and because of that exchange, there's fruit that's born forth from it. Somebody else, and both people are freely giving and receiving.
Yes.
That freedom is the big distinction here, guys, between influencing and manipulating. But when we enter into an influential relationship, it's fecund, it's fruitful. Like there's fruit that comes forth from it, and the person, both people are better after the influencing. They're better than they were before it.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and manipulation is different. So here, like kind of just to break down this visual for you guys and to talk about these distinctions. So manipulation takes for oneself, influence gives, right? We were talking about that it implies this self-gift. It's this flowing into. Manipulation doesn't consider the other's free will. So if we were to take that visual, it's kind of like, you will receive this water no matter what, right? Like if that...
It's an imposition.
Yes. Manipulation, it does not consider the other's free will. Influence does consider the other's free will. Influence tells the truth, and it tells the whole truth. It doesn't omit anything. It tells the truth so that the other can make an informed decision. Manipulation tells lies or omits truth. Omits those, I guess, inconvenient truths.
It's deceptive. Okay. And an example of this comes to mind recently. Okay. So Erin and I were sitting down for dinner, and Avila had just come from my mom's house, and we have like this, 90 minutes a day for TV, right? And so I know that when I went and picked up Avila, that she was watching TV at that time. And when I talked to her, she was like, yeah, all we did was watch TV. And she'd been there for about an hour. And so I was thinking to myself, okay, she's been watching TV for the last hour. She doesn't need to be watching TV. And so when we get home, Erin goes, Matt, like, I was like, I don't want to watch any more TV. And Erin's just like, why? Like, has she watched her 90 minutes? And I was just like, yeah. Yeah, she's been like watching for like the last hour and a half. And she was like, oh, I didn't really know that. And then she was just like, who told you that? Did like your mom tell you that? And I was just like, no, Avila told me. She's like, well, she's 5. She doesn't really know time too well.
she always is like, tomorrow I'm doing this.
And so I was just like,
next year.
Well, what is that? And like the thing is, I had this image in my head where I just wanted her I just like wanted no more TV or something like that. Like I was going through my own kind of little moment where I was just like, it was really about me justifying that I'm a good parent and having all these other thoughts. So there's other stuff going on in this day. Okay. But I was really trying to manipulate the reality of what was going on, the situation, so that Aaron would just be like, okay, I'm on board with you, right? Without any questions. And Aaron's just like, why don't you just ask your mom how much time she watched TV? And I was just like, no, it's just like, why? And I was just like I was getting defensive at this point because I really wanted my way. And finally I asked my mom, she's like, oh yeah, they watched for like 10 minutes, 15, maybe 15. I don't know. Like it was like turned on right before you got started. And I was just, right before you picked him up. And I was like, huh. And then I told Erin, she was just like, so wait, not 90 minutes, right? I was just like, yes, that's true. And I was like even like you hear how quiet my voice is getting.
Yes.
But what was happening? Like I can look back and I wasn't presenting all the facts. I was omitting certain evidence. I was filling it with certain assumptions that were convenient truths, even though they weren't truth. They were actually lies, but they could have been true. Maybe, but I wasn't doing any actual investigation as to finding out whether it or not it was true, right? Why? Because I was trying to protect this image in my head at that moment of what a good parent looked like, and I was feeling insecure, and I just wanted to get my way, right?
Yeah.
A little bit of self-awareness. So this isn't supposed to turn into a coaching session for Matt right now, though it very much could, all right? Maybe
Thank you for being honest about that.
But I offer that. Okay, let's continue. What else is like some distinctions between influencing and manipulation?
Manipulation takes other people's behaviors personally. Like it makes it mean something about them. Like it's like, oh, like this. Really, it's kind of abdicating your emotions to somebody else's behaviors and being like, I feel this way because they did this. Influence knows that someone else's behaviors are the fruit of their thinking and their choices, and like the fruit of their free will, really. And then I think that's it. Yeah. Oh, I also like this too because part of our job, right? We're for-profit company, and we sell things. And when I'm talking to people who sell for us, I mean, there's only one. And like, even when I'm kind of reflecting on this myself, I love this terminology of dropping the rope. Okay. So when you are on a call with somebody and they're like, I don't know if I want to make this investment, time, money, whatever investment, I go to this visual in my mind where it's like, if I feel at all like we're playing tug of war, where it's like, I want this. And even if it's a good intention, I want this for you, you know, it's so freeing just to be able to drop the rope, to say, you know what? I just want to give you enough information so you can make an informed decision and then go pray about it, like drop the rope.
That's what Joh Paul II would say. It's like, you must choose.
Yes.
Right? That's him dropping the rope every single time. So like when you're influencing, you really are helping somebody to make an informed free will decision.
Yes.
I would say that influencing isn't just about respecting the other person's free will, but it's also helping the other person to really experience their free will. All right. And I'll tell you, one of the things that really stands in the way and erodes somebody's free will is fear, right? We've heard us maybe say this before in podcasts, but like the jury's out. Fear makes people dumb.
Yeah.
Like literally, when that amygdala starts going off and that fight or flight or freeze response starts going off, you lose cognitive abilities. You lose the ability to reason well.
That prefrontal cortex.
That prefrontal cortex starts shutting down. And this is all by God's design. So there's something amazing and beautiful in this. And at the same time, it can be very manipulative of putting people in a place of fear so that they're dumber and so that they just kind of go along with you like a bunch of lemmings. Okay. That's more of that's literally the tactic that brainwashers use.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the enemy.
Okay.
Yes.
So nobody wants to be manipulative. Nobody wants to be accidentally manipulative. Okay. So we've talked about the difference between influencing and manipulating. Now we're going to jump into some of like the tendencies that we see just within the different temperaments towards manipulation. What do we got, Erin?
There are no exceptions too, by the way. Yeah. Like I think a lot of people are like, oh, you know, like phlegmatic, they're such peacemakers. They never manipulate. guess what? They do. They manipulate through people pleasing.
Okay.
People pleasing. I love this saying, and it's not always the case, right? Like if you have really good intentions, I just want to please this person.
There's
and
nothing
you have,
wrong with wanting to please.
Yeah, but you also there's no strings attached to the people pleasing. Okay, that's the big distinction. If you're just doing it freely and you're like, look, I'm going to give you your free will, great, but people pleasing can be manipulative because it's not true. Because if you're saying yes and you really mean no, you're telling a lie. And we're going back to that zone of manipulation, right? Like it omits some of the fullness of truth here. It omits, like, it's lying. One of my coaches has always said, like, people pleasers are liars. And it's just like a funny little saying, but it
causes you to pause.
It sticks in your brain because you're like, oh, am I people pleasing? Am I not telling the truth here? Okay. That's a big thing. Okay.
Sanguines. What about sanguines?
They do it through people pleasing too, but I would say sanguines do it a lot through flattery.
Interesting.
And we'll get into that later, but flattery is a zone of manipulation there.
Okay. Cholerics never manipulate.
Oh, and I will say too, phlegmatics and sanguines too, I want to say this, there's no boundaries. They struggle with boundaries.
Okay.
With emotional boundaries.
Got it.
Yep. Cholerics. They can, like, strong arm. Theirs are, like, I think the most obvious, force by intimidation.
Yeah, the extroverts, don't be surprised when the extroverted temperaments have the most obvious manipulation tactics because they're extroverted. A lot of the stuff is outside versus the manipulation of, like, the melancholic or the phlegmatic.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit subtle because they're more introverted temperaments.
Yep. And then the melancholic has a lot of hidden manuals. Manuals are kind of they're like your rule book for how others should act. And that's the key term right there. Should. They should do this. They should do this. And they can also be a little passive aggressive. So that's, listen, all of the people who have all of every single person can have these traits. It doesn't have to be these temperaments. But this is what we found.
We're talking commonalities. We're talking commonalities, and this is based on just our own theoretical reading of the temperaments, but also our own anecdotal experience coaching each one of these people in each one of these temperaments. Okay. So when we talk, are we ready to move on here?
Yes.
All right. So when we talk about the zone of manipulation, all right, we want to help you identify when you're operating in the zone of manipulation. I love where you arrived here, Aaron. I remember the moment you kind of said, hey, like, this is a really easy way to share this because it was like, it was so easy. And I started coaching people with this and it was really helping them out a ton. All right. So we got to go back to our concentric circles, right? 2 circles, right? And maybe you've seen some of our webinars on this or been in our academy where we have the 2 circles that have inside circle 1, there is all the person's thoughts, feelings, actions, and emotions. That's like the other person's. And then there's your thoughts, feeling, actions, and emotions. And you could put like their values, decisions, things like that. So it's everything that the person has to own. Okay.
That's theirs.
That's theirs. All right. And we stay in the zone of influence when we let other people own their stuff and we choose to own our own stuff. Right? That's why we did the whole podcast series on ownership before influence. You have to land there first. So what happens when we cross over into manipulation, Aaron?
Yeah, well, okay. So you're doing this with your hands, and I do want to kind of like move on to that. Okay, so it's really helpful to know these 2 circles separately first, right? As it's like person number 1 has their own thoughts, feelings, emotions, actions, whatever, decisions. Person number 2 has their own thoughts, feelings. If you guys are watching us, we look like the Oompa Loompas actually right now. Oompa Loompa. So person number 2 has their own thoughts, feelings, and actions. And now we are humans who live in relationship. So these 2 circles kind of overlay one another. And people go, what's going on in there? What's going on in that little overlay, that central part? And that's where we have zone of manipulation and zone of influence. You can choose which one you want to be in. And so one thing that it's like when you are up in everybody in the other person's circle that is still theirs to own, when you're over there and you're like, let me just
let me just play with your thoughts.
Yeah, let me just play with your thoughts.
Your emotion.
That's also called brainwashing.
Let me just force you to do this action.
Yeah, let me force you. Let me intimidate you. Let me change your emotion. Let me, you're like all up in their stuff, and you're like focused on all their stuff. And meanwhile, you're not looking at what you actually can control, which is your own thinking and your own free will. So you're all up in their stuff. So that's one way. And another way is you literally abdicate what is within your locus of control over to them. And that shows up in blaming. Okay. So a really perfect example of that would be like, I feel sad because this person did this. I feel sad because they said that to me.
Okay.
A lot of people are like, yeah, so like that's totally legit. You should feel sad because this person said this. Okay. And I want to break this down and paint you a picture. So that person's behavior, that person's actions, which is in their locus of control, which comes from their thinking, doesn't immediately influence your emotion. Now, a lot of people think it does because it happens very quickly, but it doesn't. What happens is you perceive it, you see the behavior, you have a thought in your head, and then you have an emotion. Now, that thought may happen so quickly that you're like, no, they are the ones in charge of this, of my emotion. But that thought is a choice. And this is such a point of like hope for a lot of people. This is really, really great news because you do not need to you don't need to give in to that thought anymore, especially if it's moving you to a place of antecedent emotion, which means you're just triggered and reacting to things. Okay,
so this is us trying to explain without this amazing picture that we typically have. All right, so how about an example? All right, we've used this one before. It still works. I was showing up late coming home from work. All right, Erin was getting upset. She was upset because she was having a thought, but she thought that she was upset because I was showing up late for work. All right.
Yes.
So she was upset. Right. And so she wasn't acknowledging that she had a thought that was leading her to get upset. Right. So she was abdicating that thought, responsibility over that thought. She didn't have to get upset, but she was choosing a thought. And that thought was Matt is disrespecting me. And that was letting her get upset. Right. And so she thought the way to fix that emotion of being upset was to change my behavior as to when I came home for work. And so the way that she sought to accomplish that was by nagging me, was by silent treatment, was by passive
aggression,
by being presumptive into my intentions as to why I was a lot of blaming that was going on. All right. So like this is her trying to change my actions so that she can feel better.
Yeah.
Okay?
So I cannot feel upset.
Right. And like, but it's not, it was not zone of influence, wasn't honoring my own freedom. It wasn't honoring what was hers. She wasn't taking ownership over what was hers and letting me own what was mine.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was ending up in the zone of manipulation. But the day that she said, Matt, I'm upset, and I know that I'm upset because of a thought that I'm having. All right. And I own that. And that's mine. That's my work to do. And I really request that you come home on such and such a time. All right.
Or text me.
Text me. I'm going to have dinner ready at such and such a time. All right. If you show up, then you can have dinner on time and have it hot. If not, I'm still going to be doing dinner. Okay. And so you do whatever you want. Give it back to me. She let go of the rope. She gave me my actions back. You get to do whatever you want. And guys, all I can tell you is that receiving it from the zone of influence, it actually it changed. It wasn't resistant like this person is trying to manipulate me, and so therefore I'm gonna passive aggressively not do what she's asking me to do because I don't want to indulge her manipulation tactics. Right? That's kind of what was going on behind the scenes with me. But rather, as soon as I recognized that she was honoring my freedom, my mind started to go like, oh, my wife is really asking something of me. This is important to her. How can I give her this gift? And what that led to was me realizing that, you know what? I didn't need to be staying as late as I was at work. There were some reasons that weren't really fruitful, that were kind of more self-indulgent, that I was staying at work. And you know what? I get to choose whether or not I continue to do that. And so I started to I got better at it. I wasn't perfect at it, but I definitely got better at it. And our relationship improved. Right? Why? Because we were honoring what was inside that other person's boundaries and what was inside my own boundaries, right? And we were just acting in that zone of influence.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Okay. So let's move on here. So like here's some common ways that, that people can show up in the zone of manipulation. All right. And sometimes these things can even seem kind of like they're pretty, right? They're kind of nice, or they're helpful. We justify them. And they're not manipulative. They're actually influence. But like, we're going to reveal how they're actually manipulative.
Yeah. I think the first one's kind of obvious, though.
Sure.
The first one is by force,
Yeah.
right? You kind of know that somebody's trying to manipulate you by force. Matt, is there a temperament that kind of falls into this?
Choleric. Yes.
I think also
cholerics.
sanguine a little bit too, because they can get really like fiery about things, excited about things, and like try to like,
Yeah. Yeah, certainly.
force their positivity onto others.
Yeah.
But when you, so to kind of give an example of how force shows up, and I don't feel like we need to go into this too much, but you're going into the other person's emotion line. So you're going like trying to like, I guess like by using fear.
So fear there.
Yeah. So fear. Like, so you're going in and you're like, hey, if you don't do this, then this is going to happen.
Yep.
And that's fine. You can have consequences, and we want to kind of show you what the other side of this would look like too. But like, hey, if you don't do this, this is going to happen to you, and if you don't do this, it's going to happen to you. And really, the end goal is to get the other person to move.
Yeah, it's one thing for a person to feel this emotion of aversion. Okay, aversion is there's some evil that's avoidable. Okay, and which could be just a natural consequence.
Right.
Okay. Say for example, you don't wear your seatbelt, you get in an accident, you could really get hurt or die, right? Okay. But if I wear my seatbelt, I can avoid that.
Yeah.
Okay. So like aversion in that case, that's like healthy aversion, right? Just consequences. But like if I was to make it so that there was an unavoidable evil that was going to befall me, like that to the point where it put me into this place of fear, like it was starting to erode my reason, and that amygdala is starting to take over. And as soon as I'm operating from a place of fear, that's the thing that's like, it's that fear that's driving me. It's starting to erode somebody's free will capacity. We know literally it erodes their cognitive abilities at that point.
Yep.
Okay. So the fear is different from aversion. Aversion's not eroding our free will. Fear is eroding our free will.
Yeah. And I think the thing that this does is, and the reason why it makes it like manipulative is that there's almost like this omission of truth. Okay. So like the other side of that, let's say you have a cleric, and a cleric's like, I still want to like help guide this person. I want to influence this person. How would I go about guiding and helping them make the most informed decision? Well, you're probably not sowing seeds of fear. You're probably going, hey, here's your decision, right? Here's the decision that befalls you, that's in front of you. Here's all of the information that I know that maybe you should consider, right? Now, there's some things that might seem a little scary. If that's a problem, come to me. I can help you through it, right? And then here are the good things over here that you get to choose. It's kind of like a fuller picture of all of the things, and not just using the scary things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it gets all the data on the table.
That's
here.
it.
Okay.
It's objective. It's like, it's kind of like a good lawyer, right?
Yes.
A good lawyer who's like covering the entire case, who really, I don't think these lawyers exist, but really only has the truth in mind and no sway.
Yeah. Well, so that's why you have two lawyers, and they have to defend the case, because we know that our broken humanity, like we're going to show up with our biases.
Well,
so
of course. If you're hired by somebody, you're going to have a bias.
Right. So this is what actually aids to the legal system, though. So so getting and think about this. Remember, influencing wants the person to make a well-informed decision in freedom, and so giving them all the information that they might need to make a well-informed choice is going to be something that leads down the path of influencing. Giving sparse information or biased information, or being selective with the information you provide, right? It's not aiding in their free will choice. They're not giving a well-informed information at that point, and so it's going to be more manipulation.
I do think it could be framed, though, in a way where it's like, hey, here's how I would make the decision. Now you have your free will.
It's always, yes. Like, it's always, as long as, like, that's something that's just like, you must choose.
What I'm saying is the bias is framed by saying, this is me. Mm-hmm. This is what I would do, right?
Yes.
But like, you have your own circumstances.
Yes.
So,
and just because you say you must choose, at the end, you can be like, you must choose. So what are you going to choose? What? And like, that can still go manipulative. Like, cause you're not detached in a healthy way from the other person's decision. Yep. Right? You're still somehow wrapped up in their decision, but their decision has everything to do with them and nothing to do with you.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Flattery. This is one that I think sanguines can fall into. Flattery. And like, okay, honest affirmations, beautiful thing. And sanguines are really great and generous with honest affirmations. Mm-hmm. It's when they're maybe not so honest and maybe just kind of like exaggerated, mm-hmm. and it can be a really good intention, right? Similar to the cleric. Like, a lot of clerics want people to move for the other person's sake, right? Mm-hmm. But in this case, it's like the sanguine wants others to feel better so that they could feel better.
Yeah.
Right, about themselves. So it's like, it's kind of this funny thing. So is it going into somebody else's reason cycle? Is it going into other person's locus of control? Yes. They're trying to change like the person's like feelings towards themselves.
Yes. But
right?
It's also, flattery is like, the difference between flattery and complimenting is like, you are really, it's not coming from an honest
It's a means to an end.
It's not, it's dishonest.
Right. It kind of is a means to it.
Yes.
Right. Why do you flatter people? Like, you flatter them to kind of get what you want.
Exactly.
You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You don't just you don't compliment people to get what you want. You just compliment them.
Yes. So there's ulterior motives that come with it. Okay. People pleasing. This is another one that seems kind of pretty. Mm-hmm. We've spoken about it on past podcasts. Mm-hmm. And we're going to speak about it a lot more on the Phlegmatic podcast.
Yes.
But we already kind of hit on this one.
But it's really saying yes when you really mean no. And I always think of that scripture, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Anything else is what?
From the evil one.
Yes. Okay. So if you are going, I'll just be a martyr and say yes, but like, quietly seethe under the surface, it's just not an honest yes. Mm-hmm. I would much rather if you have this tendency to just say like, I don't really want to, but because you're asking and you need it, I will do it. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'll do it to this degree, right? Like, there's an honesty in there.
Well, there's a choice. There's an acknowledgement at that point that they have a choice in the matter.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like, oftentimes we do the people pleasing because we think we don't have a choice in the matter, because it's like, okay, well,
it's a Christian thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the only way I can if the other person's going to be upset then with my decision, then I have no choice but to be upset and beat myself up. And it's like, no, it has nothing to do with you, actually, if they get upset.
We have an entire podcast on this, and it's really helpful. But like, I do think this is like, I just want to pause here really quick, because I think this is a point of contention for a lot of people, because a lot of people are like, isn't love self-sacrificing?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So love is self-sacrificing, and love exists in the will, in the free will. Okay. So if you are feeling force because you don't want to feel bad and you don't want them to feel bad, so there's that force. You're not making this action. You're not like saying yes in freedom.
Right.
Because you're going, I'm going to feel bad. What are you doing? You're abdicating your emotions over to the other person. And you're like, I just want them to like me. So you're going into their mind and you're trying to say like, see, look how nice I am. Right? Like me. And so it's dishonest. Once again, it's kind of, it's not fruitful either because of the resentment that it leads to. Yeah. Even in parents that are like very phlegmatic parents that they want to people please their kids. Right? It's sad. Like, we hear the stories, the resentment that bubbles up. Yeah. Even
towards their kids. It's just like, well, does resentment help you become a better parent to your kids? It's like that same resentment, even whether it's your parents, your kids, or your husband or wife, to your spouse, or to your coworkers. That resentment always seems to be lurking behind the people pleasing. Yeah. And Never good. It's poison to a relationship.
It's not loving. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like that thought, this is the loving thing to do. Ask yourself really what's going on. Like, okay.
Okay. So then we got manuals.
Oh, manuals. Manuals are those unspoken expectations. It's your rule book for how everyone should act. I mean, yourself too. Like we have manuals for ourselves, but like this is, since we're talking about influencing others, you know, that you have this rule book. Okay. There's a lot of different manuals, like, oh, this person should know better. This person should be more thoughtful. This person should do this the right way. This person should learn from their mistakes. This person, see, they all sound really nice, right? Mm-hmm. Like they kind of sound like helpful and fruitful. And yeah, like, shouldn't people know how to do these things? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be better for them if they knew how to do these things?
Yeah. I mean, a manual that comes up in my mind sometimes is like, this person, like at work, like, oh no, this person should have taken their own initiative on this. This person should have seen this too. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, well, like that's a thought that I have. It's a hidden manual. I've never even presented this as an expectation that I'm looking for initiative in, say, this area, right? And if I haven't done that, then it's a manual, right? The key with manuals is like you have these. It's not that you can't have rule books or expectations for people, but when you hide them, and then you get upset with them and you make them experience pain, you know, in some way for not living up to that hidden expectation. That's where, and that pain comes in the form of passive aggressive, or you know, beating around the bush, and what like it's. But even there, like when I've indulged in that tendency to be upset with somebody that's not taking initiative in the way that I want them to be taking initiative at work, I never actually take the responsibility of telling them what the expectation is. Again, what happens when we manipulate? We abdicate responsibility for what is ours, in this case, to tell my employees my expectations that I have for them. Mm-hmm. And then we like try to subtly manipulate, right, the emotions or the thinking or the actions of other people in the group. So like the thought is like by giving people kind of the passive aggressive, you know, Slack messages or something like that they'll figure out what I want them to do, and they'll go do it, right? Mm-hmm. And they'll feel good about it too. Like that's the thing. But like that's never really what happens. Like, that's the funny thing about manipulation is we think it's actually getting us the results that we want. And maybe on the outside it looks like it is. Like maybe the behavior actually changes that we want to see. Maybe that behavior actually shows up. But I promise you, if the person's not changing that behavior based on their own free will, they're working at a third at best of the productivity on your team than you can expect from them. Yeah. Like they're more so an actively disengaged employee than they're certainly not an engaged employee. Engaged employees, by definition, the ones with their own free will, are moving the mission forward of the organization, right? And think about this even in your family with your kids, and that, like, that's your little organization. That's your little business in your family. And they're also like, they're not moving forward their own free will at that point.
Yep. Yeah.
They're actually more likely actively disengaged.
Yep.
Like working against the mission.
Yeah.
Behind your back.
I would say like manuals are the quickest way to have manuals and to cling to them and not do anything about them, but just continue to indulge in them, is the quickest way to blaming your disappointment on somebody else's actions.
Yes. Yes.
But that disappointment's coming from your thinking, which is so freeing to know that. It's just like, oh, did you know that you don't have to keep feeling disappointed? Like, all you have to do is drop these manuals.
Okay. So there's a couple examples. We got force, we have flattery, we have people pleasing, and then we have manuals. All right. So how do we start to move, Aaron, from this zone of manipulation into that zone of influence? All
right. Well, you got to clean up all that stuff first, right? What we just went through, like, do your work on this.
Yeah,
like,
go listen to our ownership podcast series. Like, that's step one.
And here's another thing. Join our academy. If you're not a part of our academy, we walk through this stuff. We have so many workshops on these things. And it's, I mean, just join it for 1 month. You could go check that out.
Yeah, the coaching that we do is primarily moving you to a place of ownership. And that is like, if you want to influence, you have to own first. And so that's really whenever we have a group coaching call or one-on-one coaching, the mindset coaching that we do is moving you to a place of ownership, right? Honoring what's inside your locus of control and taking charge of that and letting go and surrendering those things that are outside of your locus of control. All right. So like yeah, I'd say come and get coached in our academy.
Yeah, because when you're owning stuff, you're acting in your own free will, and then you can actually love people.
Yeah, it's empowering. It's really empowering stuff.
Yep.
Okay, so how do we start moving? So we start by ownership there.
Well, it's kind of like what you just gave an example, like when you were talking about the manuals before. The first step is to be transparent and honest. Like, where can you take responsibility in that? Like, first, I kind of, when you were saying like, oh, there's a person on my team. Wait, did I ever set this expectation? You know, can I be more clear on my expectations? Maybe ask yourself some of these questions. Where can I take responsibility here? What's within my locus of control? Where am I abdicating my, like, where am I blaming? And guys, blame is like the easiest indicator to find this. Like, if you are blaming someone, you are about ready to step into that zone of manipulation. Maybe you're not there yet, but you are close, if not completely there.
You know how I do it? I go on the Slack channel when I identify something that I perceive to be a problem, and I put a Slack channel and I go, how did this happen?
That's how Matt blames through his melancholic
what is going on
lens.
here? And it's just like, and like people just start scrambling. I mean, it's just like, that creates so much unnecessary emotional baggage to be like, just, all right, like, what's going on? Like, just like get to the point, be blunt, like, just be frank, lean into that gift of yours.
I think a way that I can subtly manipulate is in coaching, not like on purpose, really. Obviously, we don't want to like manipulate people on purpose, but
like coaching without their permission.
No, not that actually. But it's my desire to shift somebody's emotion to a better emotion because I want to feel better. Because I don't want to be in that space.
Yeah, that's that sanguine, that high positivity.
That's it. It's like, and so I can find myself like, playing that tug of war with them and like, but let me tell you all the ways that you need to be positive. Oh, it was really kind of funny. But I do find myself that. And so when I feel that urgency to like change their mind, that's an indicator for me. Like, drop the rope, Aaron. Move back. Like, get curious too, which is our next step. Right, exactly. What can I own? My emotion and what I think about my own coaching is my work to do, not theirs. All right. So next thing, get curious about the other person. Isn't it crazy to think like, oh, in order to flow into the other person, we got to know if this is an open, empty glass first, right? We got to know, what are they like? What are they good at?
How do they receive?
Yes. Like, how do they receive? What's their best way of receiving?
What motivates them? What their gifts are? What their strengths are? And like, when you start to learn about the unique design of the other person, you start to learn the keys to really influencing the other person. Again, when I say the keys to influencing them, there's no violation of free will. They're open to it, right? We desire to be in communion with one another. This is like part of our Catholic anthropology. We know that we're made for communion. We're made for relationship. People desire to be in relationship. And relationships do have this inflowing of one person into the other. Influencing is part of being in a relationship. But if you don't know how the other person receives, that's really step one, to kind of get curious about how they receive and get curious about what they even desire, right? We've got a whole podcast series that's dedicated to how to love and motivate the different temperaments, right? That's episodes 107 through 110 in the Catholic Coaching Podcast. So check those out. We also have like a whole podcast series dedicated to how to ask better questions to each one of the temperaments, right? And so that's episodes 129 to 132. But this place of curiosity is really where the influencer lives, because the influencer does not flow into until they have done their due diligence through that curiosity and determine that the other person is open to receiving.
I was just reading in this book. Oh, shoot. I'm going to forget what the book's name is, but it's such a cool book, and it's about the words that we use. Anyway, and I think this is a great application for everybody to walk away with. But one of the challenges in the book is like when you are talking to somebody and listening to somebody and like being curious about somebody, don't wait to talk, which, I mean, that's basic like active listening skills, but like don't wait to talk. Actually comment on something that they just shared and that only. So like it's kind of this constraint when it comes to I want to share. Like it's like, hey, if you just shared something about your dog, like I don't go into something else. I just go, so what kind of dog is it? Right? Like I'm just curious about what you just said.
Yeah.
And there's that element of that curiosity stepping into it. I think that's a great application to learn how to actively listen, but also how to actively be curious about the person. And then finally, pray. Ask the Lord how he wants you to pray for them, because that's a big piece to influence. That's a huge piece to influence. I would say that's the biggest piece to influence. If you want somebody to live in a better way, right? Because there's a lot of people who get introduced to this work and they go, I want everybody to know about mindset work, and I want everybody to know about locus control and all this stuff
and everything like that.
Yeah. And like, how do we change their minds or whatever? And it's a beautiful intention behind it. I ask the Lord. I mean, he has placed that person on your heart for a reason, whether it's somebody who's very close to you or whatever, but like he's placed that, say like, Lord, how do you want me to pray for them? I remember my mom always telling me that. She said, ask the Lord how he wants you to pray for this person. She's like, it's such a docile prayer, but it's just like so fruitful because we don't ever ask him that stuff.
And your mom was so phlegmatic, and that was a beautiful expression of how phlegmatic influences, just this docility that's there and this curiosity that's like not the opposite of imposing.
Yeah. And then you want to ask the Lord what your role is in this person's life too.
Yeah.
How you can be of service to them. Because remember, that influence is flowing into, like, Lord, how much am I pouring into this person today? In this next moment, in this conversation, how much do you want me pouring into this person? I go back to Christopher West, always talking about this, and TUB. I mean, that's some heavy material to be breaking into with people in their lives. And he talks about how like you can dip your dance partner too soon.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And that's the same element. You could pour into a glass that has a top on it, or you could pour into an already full glass.
Well, you can pour into a glass and they just don't have the capacity to receive more. It's starting to overflow and it's a net negative, and it's not coming anymore. And it's like people, like, we have glasses that can actually like expand in size. Like, that's the beauty of it. Like we can always grow in charity, always grow in our ability to receive and grow in our lives, which is amazing. And so what I hear, Aaron, is like, guys, as we're showing him being influencing, maybe like we recognize that somebody's open to receiving what we have to give them. And then as we're flowing into them, we realize they're hitting a saturation point. Like be a student of the other person as you're flowing into them, because they may hit a saturation point. This is what we're always doing with coaching. We have a little check-in that we'll do. So coaching, we're kind of moving the person forward, and we may want to take them to the next step, but the person may be kind of just still processing the work that you've already done. Like, just allow the space for the person to process. Allow the Lord to be the one that dictates the pace, and the person, more so than we, the influencers, to be the one that's dictating the pace on how much we're flowing into this person.
It's right. I mean, and I know this is implied, but it's the Holy Spirit who's like moving the whole thing.
Yes.
And you get to be like, to have that privilege to kind of be that mouthpiece of the Holy Spirit, but you're watching that person kind of receive.
Yes, you may be the pitcher, but the Holy Spirit is the living water that's inside that pitcher.
Amen. Yes.
Cool.
I love really clean analogies and pictures. All right, guys.
So as we kind of wrap up here, let's like what we talked about, like really what influence is, what manipulation is. Really, the big distinction between influencing and manipulation is influencing always honors the person's freedom. Manipulation,
it's honest,
violates that person's freedom. Okay, so big distinctions that are there. Influencing also like takes responsibility for what's theirs, their thoughts, feelings, and actions, and doesn't try to get up in somebody else's thoughts, feelings, and actions. Whenever we abdicate responsibility for what is ours, or we try to grasp at control of what is not ours, we end up in that zone of manipulation. Okay? There's some pretty manipulation tactics out there. People pleasing, flattery, it's still manipulation at the end of the day. Okay? So be subtle, be aware of those subtle ones. And then moving into that zone of influence, it's a lot about being curious about the other person, right? We may have something that's good to give to them, but we need to be in touch with their unique design, how they receive, what they really desire, what they're longing for at that moment, and then be able to fill only to the extent that they're able to receive at that moment. What we're going to be talking about in the following series is how each one of you influences. So each one of you has a dominant temperament, and those temperaments influence in different ways, right? So we may get caught up in thinking that influence happens one way, and we got the Instagram influencers that are out there, and we think that's how it's going to be. Maybe those are all the sanguine cholerics that are out there on Instagram influencing that way. But each one of us, through our unique design, is called to influence in a way that is uniquely us, uniquely you, okay? So that's what the next couple episodes are going to be exploring, how you uniquely influence others.
Can't wait.
Cool. Stay tuned. Subscribe. We'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for sticking with us in the Catholic Coaching Podcast. If you like what you heard,
please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again.